The Weekly Show with David J. Maloney. And now, here's your host, David J. Maloney.
Welcome, everyone, to The Weekly Show. I'm your host, David J. Maloney. On tonight's show, we've got a really interesting guest. He came into the national spotlight with the smash success of the Netflix documentary, The Tiger King. In some ways, he's a Hollywood screenwriter's midnight creation, but on our show tonight, he's completely real. Phoning into our show from jail tonight is none other than the Tiger King himself, Joe Exotic. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Our featured guest tonight exploded onto the national stage with the success of the Netflix documentary, The Tiger King. The show played like a movie script, but it truly was reality. No one could have made this stuff up. No one could have made Joe up. Here to chat about the show, his imprisonment, court case, his upcoming projects and events is none other than the Tiger King himself, Joe Exotic. Joe, welcome to the show.
I appreciate you having me.
Much of America has come to know you from the smash hit Netflix series, The Tiger King, but there are still some people out there who don't know much about you other than maybe the name and the connection to the Tiger King show. How did the show originally come about, and what parts of your life do you think kind of set everything up for that moment?
Well, you know, David, first of all, I didn't film for Tiger King, so everything that was filmed was pretty much staged by the producers of Tiger King. Everything you saw of me was old archived footage of my TV reality show that I was filming for. And when they had me arrested, we got all the evidence now of them paying the witnesses, the government witnesses, during my trial, out of the witness room to keep the story going. So there's a lot of people out there that doesn't know the real Joe Exotic. And if it wasn't for my YouTube channel, there'd be a whole lot more people. But most people have taken the time to go actually learn about me and the truth behind this show. But I have never seen the show, so I can't really comment on exactly how it portrayed me. But I know one thing that it portrayed me as, and that was an animal abuser. And I have never been accused of animal abuse or animal cruelty by any law enforcement agency in this country. So that was all portrayed by the filmmakers.
And you spent years, I mean, like decades, working with exotic animals or rescues. And I mean, and regardless of the convictions or the public opinion on the matter, you spent years working with them. What made you want to work with animals to begin with?
Well, I grew up on a farm and a ranch. I was born in Kansas, grew up on a farm there till I was 13, and then I grew up the rest of it in the mountains of Wyoming. And, I had a pet antelope and a pet deer and pet porcupines and all of that. And that's, I've always had a love for animals. But in 1985 and 86, my brother and me bought an exotic pet store in Texas, and we had that until 97 when he got killed. And then that's when me and my mom and dad started the zoo in memory of my brother. And that's when I got into the big exotics. And, I rescued over 2,000 tigers, and then I placed them in zoos all over the world. And I worked with the National Institute of Health and the scientists at Texas A&M University on blood diversity to try and save the genetics and the strong bloodlines of the tigers. And the animal rights people just couldn't stand it, so they concocted this whole story up, put me in prison, and neutered and spayed every one of my cats.
Mm. I know, I mean, lots of people will only know, Joe Exotic as the tiger guy from the Netflix show, and was arrested and charged, like you said, with the animal cruelty or something. And yet, I mean, you were a zookeeper and animal handler for years and years, and you've had some people who've worked closely with you who still defend you to this day. I mean, what would you do differently as a zookeeper if you could rewind time? Is there anything you'd do differently?
First of all, I'm not in here for animal cruelty. I'm in here for taking 5 endangered species without a permit because they're saying that I should have had a permit to euthanize them. But my USDA license and my protocols told me to euthanize them. So it's 2 government agencies that don't want to agree here, and I'm in prison for it. But John Rinke, the guy with no legs in Tiger King, is my strongest ally that has been with me this whole way. And if I could rewind time, I wouldn't even rewind it enough to get Carole Baskin out of my life. I would just rewind it back enough to get Jeff Lowe and James Garrison out of my life because they're the ones who orchestrated this whole thing.
I know at some point you've said that given your time in prison, you now understand what it feels like to be in a cage and maybe can empathize with animals in captivity, even those in a comfy zoo. Tell us about that realization. Why do you feel that our society's current zoo concept needs to be reworked?
Well, as well as I took care of my animals and the best that I could provide them with the habitat to live in, man, especially my chimpanzees and my primates, because we as human beings relate to them more than anything. And after me sitting in here, especially 2.5 years of solitary confinement, I would never have an animal in a cage again, even a hamster. As bored as a hamster gets and curls up and sleeps in the cage, I would never have a hamster in a cage ever again. And when I get out of here, I'm not going to advocate against animals being in captivity. I'm going to advocate and help raise money to rebuild and educate people that have private zoos and have animals that don't know how to take care of them and help better their animals' lives instead of just trying to take them away and put them in a sanctuary to do the exact same damn thing like they're doing mine. I was supposed to be so horrid for having animals in a cage, but everybody that has my animals now are charging to see them just like I did. So my animals are still not being properly cared for. They're being exploited, no different than I did. But did I learn? Have I learned that I should have provided a hell of a lot more for my apes and my primates as far as enrichment and a habitat and socialization? You bet your ass. I should have had my ass kicked.
This part of the conversation was making me think a little bit of Steve Irwin, because I remember Steve was kind of at one point kind of fighting to keep animals out of zoos and in the wild with his conservation efforts. And if I recall correctly, I think you might have actually had a conversation with him at some point, maybe regarding a croc or an alligator you were trying to save or something. How did that conversation come about? And what was your impression of Steve?
I actually got to know Mindy and Steve over the telephone for helping, because when I rescued a big alligator out of a pond in Oklahoma in the middle of the wintertime, he had a severe eye infection, and no vet knew how to treat a crocodile, an alligator, because it was a reptile. And so just out of the blue, I thought, you know what, let me pick up the phone and call the Australian Zoo and see if I can get, somebody to help me out. And then Steve jumped on the phone, and he got his veterinarians there on the phone and gave me a rundown to tell my vet of what medicines were safe for an alligator and how to treat it. And I did, and we successfully did that. And then about 7 months later, we had a kangaroo throw her pouch, turn her pouch inside out. And no vet ever had seen a kangaroo turn their pouch inside out. So I picked up the phone again, and I got a hold of Mindy, and damn, without any questions, wanting to know anything, they got their vets on the phone and helped me with my kangaroos. So, over the telephone, we got to know each other and great colleagues, and may Steve rest in peace. That's what I would like to see is more advocation to save animals in the wild and take care of them in the wild. And I've done that through my past, and I've never gotten credit for anything. You know, I raised 70,000 African rams and hired rangers to protect white rhinos. I've raised money to help protect elephants, and you know, you never get credit for anything good. It's always the bad.
Another character who's played an outsized part in your life, and you mentioned her earlier, of course, is Carole Baskin. I'm honestly curious what your first impression was of her before you really knew anything about her.
Okay, well, you know how I even found out about Carole Baskin was I was standing at a gas station in Oklahoma City one day, and this was like back in 2006. And I was looking at the Oklahoma City newspaper, and on the front page here, it's talking about this little roadside zoo. And I got to reading it, and it was about me. And then I saw at the bottom that it was written by Carole Baskin. And I'm like, who the hell is this person that is talking about my zoo? And so I go back and I Google her, and come to find out she has a place in Florida. She's claiming she has 150 big cats. And her husband is missing, okay? So the old police chief of me kicks in, and I'm like, well, you know, her husband is missing since 1997. Why is this woman picking on me? And the more I dug in, the more fascinated I got that she was running 7 nonprofits from one location, and she was raising money off of animals, and she was buying rental property and selling them to her other nonprofit for $10. And I should have just left well enough alone, but the more I dug, the more criminal activity I found that Carole was involved in. And I started interviewing people. I flew to, it's on my YouTube channel. I flew to Florida and filed charges with the sheriff's office for 60 counts of notary fraud. And this lady just kept on and on and on, and she built websites about me. Then I was her most wanted for animal abuse and everything else, all because I bred and I let people pet baby tigers. And you know, it never got to the point where people think from the show, you know, that Joe wanted to kill Carole and it was this horrible physical confrontation. You know, what it turned into was Carole made money from me convincing her followers that I was an animal abuser, and they gave her money to try and stop me. And I made money on my online television show convincing people that she was batshit crazy, wears flowers on her head, and she killed her husband. And that's what it turned into. And it just, you know, it escalated with the following, and then people started, you know, paying us to do dares on TV. Hell, we wore diapers sometimes. We acted like we were smoking pot sometimes. And then somebody paid us one night to blow up a sex doll and dress like Carole. And we did. And unfortunately, they used that against me in court.
Now, you mentioned we were talking about going back in time. And I was going to ask you, if you go back in time, would you have gotten as far away from her as soon as humanly possible? But then you said you wouldn't even rewind the clock back that far. Why not?
Well, because first of all, you couldn't get away from Carole. Okay, she built websites about you, and we have the evidence, and she even testified in court that she paid people to follow me when I did my magic tour with tigers. You know, at the mall. She paid somebody to follow my whole tour and report to her everything I did. You couldn't run far enough to get away from Carole. So all I done was I worked my ass off and I hauled scrap iron to pay lawyer bills to keep fighting her in court. That's all you can do for Carole. But Carole wasn't gonna shut me down. She couldn't for 11 years. She had that $1 million judgment on me for 11 years. She spent $2 million trying to collect $1 million. And this was all of donated money, you know, under Big Cat Rescue. So Carole wasn't a threat to me. It was Jeff conned his way into the zoo and conned his way to get his name on half the property, telling us he was an investor when he was actually pissed broke. And him and James were running such a criminal enterprise with sex trafficking and bank fraud and identity theft and everything else that it came to a point that I left my zoo. June the 16th of 2018, I walked away. I gave them the zoo. And I came to Gulf Breeze and rented a house and got a job washing dishes at Peg Leg Pete's. And I was perfectly happy. And 3 months later, they still couldn't stand it that Joe Exotic still outdone them and had a better zoo, and they couldn't run a zoo. Okay, they wanted my zoo. They got my zoo. They couldn't run it. And if you see what the USDA and the feds did to Jeff Lowe afterwards by raiding him and showing how many animals were starved and died and everything else, the man just couldn't accept the fact that he could never be me because he dresses like Evel Knievel and Robbie Knievel. He stole Robbie's identity. I mean, he dresses to this day like Robbie Knievel. He always has to be someone else because he can't be himself, because he hates himself. He sells his wife to have sex with other people while he watches. We have those phone recordings from his wife. They drugged girls at the zoo to have sex with them and make videos and blackmail them. And we have recordings off of their phones that Lauren recorded admitting to raping people. You know, these people are vile. And if I could wind back time, I'd just wind it back to 2017 where I never met Jeff.
At what point did you realize that the prosecutors were looking at you as a prime suspect? I mean, at what point did they make it official to you that they were looking at you and that you were a suspect to them?
When they arrested me at the hospital in Gulf Breeze on September the 7th, 2018. Before that, I had no clue.
So, Joe, I know one of the convictions you received was from a dying tiger killed that was referenced in the documentary. And they ruled against you because they said you didn't have the proper paperwork to euthanize it. They weren't. I don't know if they were really actually ruling so much on the morality of the issue. It was seemingly more regulatory. Is that something that you wish more people knew about?
Okay, well, you know, I'm here. I'm not here again for animal cruelty or putting tigers to sleep. I'm here for taking 5 tigers without a permit, like I went hunting or something. Okay, my USDA license protocol said euthanization by gunshot or by injection. My veterinary protocol that was signed off by my inspector and my vet said euthanization by gunshot or by injection. Okay, now keep in mind, since 1999, when running that zoo, we euthanized all kinds of endangered animals, right? Never needed a permit. And also keep in mind, the Federal Fish and Wildlife game warden who arrested me and charged me with this, okay, in the 23 years that I ran that zoo, not one time did a federal wildlife agent come and inventory how many cats or endangered animals I had, how many were born, how many had been moved to other zoos, how many have died, or where the bodies were of the ones that were dead. Never, okay, until they needed to put me in prison. So my inspector, who couldn't be found for trial, okay, my federal attorneys that were paid by the government claimed that they couldn't find my federal inspector. And I don't know how you don't find a federal employee to subpoena him for court. But she came through the zoo every time she inspected, and she always said, Joe, why are you making these animals stay alive that are so old and crippled? Because you have 260 more tigers. Why don't you put some of these to sleep? Okay? The answer, honest answer, David, is because crippled and old animals in a cage up front, the first ones that you see, raise more money because people feel sorry for them. And you're supposed to be trying to save them, okay? And that's how Carole makes money, is by operating on animals on YouTube and Facebook. It's just a scam. And unfortunately, I got wound up in the same scam, right? So when I got ready to start leaving the zoo, I called PETA myself, and Brittany Pete helped me move over 80 tigers and lions, bears, primates, the chimps, everything. I was moving off the zoo because I wanted out. After Travis died, I was done. Okay? I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep up with all the drunk employees, the drugs, the problems, people getting hurt, Sap lost an arm. I just couldn't take it anymore after Travis got killed. Okay, so we needed to put these 5 tigers to sleep because winter was coming, okay, and they couldn't walk properly, and I didn't want them to suffer. So I have an option. I can either tranquilize them, and tranquilizing them is not a pretty picture. You shoot them with a dart that's 8 to 9 inches long, and it has a 22 gauge primer in it, and it travels at 200 miles a second. And it hits that animal so hard and so fast that the gel cap has to penetrate the skin in order for the dart to not fall out. And the animal's climbing the fence, screaming, freaking out, and then you have to shoot them 5 or 6 more times, depending on how fat they are, how skinny they are, how many times they've been drugged and they're used to the drugs, and so on, okay? So for 45 minutes to an hour, this animal is puking. It is having seizures. It is having convulsions, and it's just ugly. So that way the vet can walk in and kill it. Where a gunshot is done instantaneously if it's done properly, and that's to the brain. So I got my cats to come to the side of the cage because they're my kids, and I put them to sleep, and I buried them side by side respectfully with all of their body parts and their teeth and everything. Okay, so we have evidence now in text messages between the agents and Jeff and James that the only way they were going to convict me of murder for hire was to recharge me with 20 animal charges. So they dug up those 5 tigers and they cut their heads off, okay? And they paraded pictures and photographs of rotten tiger heads with arrows through them to show the gunshot holes in their skulls, and made me out to be this horrible animal killer in order to convict me for murder for hire that they couldn't get to stick.
Do you think
and that's the story, okay?
When I was reading on it a little bit, I was myself as a lawyer rather surprised that they combined your 2 trials into 1 trial instead of 2 separate trials. Do you think that the fact that they combined these things together may have played a role in your verdicts? From a legal standpoint, the term we use is one prejudices the other. Do you believe that played a role in your verdicts?
Hey, during my before my trial, we filed a motion to sever the cases, and this same corrupt judge refused to sever them. Okay, so they tried me with them all together, and seriously, during my trial, if you read the transcripts, it's more about the Big Cat Safety Act and animal abuse than it is about murder for hire. Okay, so I got convicted. Then, and also keep in mind, from September the 7th to March of 2018 to March the 25th of 2020, I was kept in solitary confinement, so I couldn't call nobody. I couldn't help build my case, so I had to use free lawyers. Okay, and they'd done everything they wanted to themselves, right? So I got convicted, and I wanted the cases severed. Okay, well, then I went to prison, and they did the same thing to me. The first 89 days was in solitary confinement. The next 11 months was in a warehouse above the hospital, okay, by myself. No access to lawyers, no access to help and build a case, so I had to use a free lawyer again for my first appeal. And he chose not to appeal my cases to be severed. He only wanted to go for the sentence being too long. Well, we won that appeal for the sentence too long, and the same corrupt judge, what did he do? He just gave me 1 year off.
He reduced it a year.
So here I said again, with the same aspect, okay, except this time I poured a $500,000 into lawyers, but everybody wants to go their own route, and nobody wants to sit down and talk to Joe about the story. Oh, Joe, why did you do this? Why did you say this? What led you up to this? Okay, they all based their own stories to defend me off of Netflix. Never, David, never in 6 years have I been able to sit down and look at evidence and tell my lawyers that I'm paying my story, because they all come up with their own damn story, and it's my life. Because why? Because they're all on TV. They're all on court TV doing this. You know, they're driving big buses to the White House to get attention. Hell, my life has been a show over television.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. Next week, we're going to have the next installment of our interview with Joe Exotic, so please tune back in. Stay safe, everyone.